Right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the second of our webinars. Our topic for this evening is how to support the development of 11 to 15-year-old cricketers. And I'm delighted to welcome Somerset CCC Head of Talent Pathway, Matt Drakeley, and Pathway Coaching Lead, Andrew Griffiths, with us tonight. Matt is a level 4 coach. He's been working at Somerset for the last 4 years, where before he became Head of the Talent Pathway, just around Christmas time, oversaw the county age group programme. And Griff is currently working towards his level 4 or very close to completing it. And he has worked as an analyst with the professional staff here, as well as coaching on the county age group programme, as well as all the way up through to academy as well. Matt and Griff, I'm sure some of you guys know them as well, but have a wealth of knowledge from the club game all the way through to county age group cricket and all the way up to the professional game as well. So hopefully they'll share lots of that stuff with us this evening, with the aim of hopefully supporting and challenging coaches this evening and around the thinking of different ways in which coaches can add value to a coaching program at their clubs and help support their players. This evening we'll focus on 3 main areas. That will be developing the why. So by that, kind of looking at the tactical side of the game, practice design, and then coach decision making. And these will become a little bit clearer as we discuss them in a little bit more detail throughout the evening. There'll be time for questions at the end, but feel free to add questions into the chat box as we go. And we may answer some as we go along if they're relevant to the bit we're talking about. If not, we'll answer them at the end. So we'll save some time for that as well. So feel free to add them. So I think we'll get started. So Griff and Drakes, thanks for joining us this evening. Hope you're both well. I think we'll kick off the last 2 years for everyone has obviously been a little bit of a challenge. How's that affected you guys kind of on the pathway? And have you had any big learnings to take away from the past couple of years?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. And firstly, thanks for having us, and thanks everyone for coming along. Just to add to what Scott says there, I think me and Griff are potentially quite unusual within pathways. We've come through a journey of both being involved in cricket in Somerset at a youth level, a club level, sorry. So myself at Minehead and Griff at Bath, and we've kind of up to the age we are now been on a journey where we've learned most of our coaching trade through club cricket onto pathway cricket, and then all that good stuff with the ECB's program that they offer as well as learning on the job. So a slightly different point of view than others potentially who come into the game from different angles. But yeah, the last 2 years have been really interesting, and I think for all the potentially bad opportunities that have been missed in terms of players having access to all the coaching that we would have liked them to. I think from our point of view, it's allowed us to have a different perspective on how things can operate or do operate. So I remember the first kind of initial return to delivering coaching, we had to set things up really quickly. We had worry from umpires about whether they wanted to be involved in our county structure. We had counties worrying about travelling. We were conscious of how much of an issue travelling was. So we looked at things differently. We played a lot of inter-squad cricket. We managed a lot of games ourselves. So no umpires there, us on the field, kind of umpiring / coaching, which I think was different. It took people a while to get used to, but we started to understand the actual value of the conversations we could have out in the middle allowed us to understand actually where are the players in terms of their development. So we'd obviously be able to feed back to them on what we were observing from a technical perspective, how we were seeing them play in comparison to what we'd see them do indoors. But I think more importantly for us, the questions we began asking about, what are you thinking here? What are you looking to do? What ball are you trying to deliver? It allowed us to have a lot more clarity on where those players were with their understanding of the game. And I think we're probably, Griff, it would be fair to say, slightly surprised initially, but I think with the benefit of hindsight and an understanding of what coaching would have looked like in the pathway up until that point, it made sense to us why players weren't particularly tactically skillful. So I think that would be my biggest learning, Scott, is just allowing us to have a different perspective on how cricket can be delivered and as a result, allow us to see where players are at in terms of their understanding. And I'm not sure it would have happened as quickly from our perspective if we hadn't have had that kind of bit of a reset. We were stuck in playing against other counties, games looking very formalised in terms of it had to look like proper cricket. And I think what COVID allowed us to do is it allowed people to understand and us to understand a bit more that there are better ways of doing that.
So actually from something that was quite tricky, it's given you an opportunity to actually reset and start again and almost look at what you're delivering, and has been able to add some different things to what you do and how you do things. Griff, anything extra from you to add on to that?
Yeah, I think firstly, good evening, guys, and thanks for jumping on the call. And Chappie, thanks for inviting us on. I'm really looking forward to it. But yeah, like the reason that we named this part of it Developing the Why, I think the biggest realization for us in those sort of initial interactions and conversations on the pitch was guys would often, and girls to be fair, but there would be conversations with players who would have a really good understanding of what ball they were trying to bowl, as an example, or what shot they might be looking to play, and how they're looking to do that. So the technical knowledge that might underpin them being able to execute that skill. But when you actually dug a little bit deeper about why they were looking to do it, what fields they might have set, what gaps in space there might be for them to look to score runs into, they didn't really have much of a plan. They didn't really have any understanding of the why, really. So we kind of posed a couple of questions to them, a couple of scenarios around, and this was more for batters actually, around, I sort of discussed this earlier, but what situation could they relate to more in terms of when they go into bat? Do they watch the ball, hit the ball, react based on where the ball's gone, and then run if there is a run there? Or actually they come in, take their guard, look up, identify gaps in space, and then think about how they're looking to score their runs and what level of risk might be associated with targeting certain areas. And whilst that may seem quite advanced, I think we have since adapted a lot of our approaches just to try and develop that sort of understanding of the why and that more tactical side of the game. And that certainly isn't to devalue the technical fundamentals. I mean, they're absolutely essential for me in terms of players being able to perform the tactical stuff that they're looking to develop. But without that tactical awareness, they're sort of, what are they actually trying to do? How are they looking to play and develop and win games of cricket ultimately? So yeah, that would be my take on it.
So I think we had a conversation when we were kind of discussing this, and it's around that if you don't have the technical skills to play the game, actually you could be the cleverest cricketer in the world tactically wise, but it's not going to help because you can't hit the ball, you can't bowl it anywhere near where it's supposed to be, that kind of thing. But actually you could be a brilliant cricketer technically wise, but if you've got no understanding of the game, no awareness, no ability to react to different things that's happening, actually you're incredibly limited there. So you're having guys coming to you on the county age group program that have played a lot of cricket in clubs, potentially in schools, as well as with you, as well as they go up through the age groups. If we're at club level, what does that look like in helping to develop that tactical awareness, that the why in those players at club level?
Do you want to take that first, Drake? So do you want me to go there?
No, you start off.
Yeah, so I think, look, I guess there's a couple of things I think that underpin it, really. I think the way things are, I guess, in this country, naturally with the climate, we have to spend a lot of time indoors. Probably 6 or 7 months of the year are probably spent indoors in nets. And then when you get outdoors, a lot of training is done in nets as well. So immediately you haven't got that context, I guess, of what that looks like with fielders. And I think the approach that we've taken a lot since then to develop that would be to sort of try and provide that context where possible. Certainly having more conversations with players around, okay, what fields might we be looking to set? What shots might we be looking to get batters to play? Initially, certainly at the younger age groups, that would be a lot more simplified and basic, I guess, in terms of, right, how can we get players to play square of the wicket? How can we get batters to hit back down the ground? What deliveries might we look to bowl? And then that would eventually lead to conversations around, right, what field might we set based on where we're looking to be hit? So yeah, practices would sort of been, I guess, progressively would get more advanced based on the level of the cricketers. But yeah, I think we could be smart with how we provide that context in in training sessions, and making sure that actually nets aren't just an opportunity to hit some balls against bowlers, an opportunity to bowl some balls at batters. And there's a lot more sort of tactical development underpinning them as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think to add to that, and Griff summed it up quite well, but I guess as a journey, that would look like, obviously, when someone potentially comes into cricket, the default that we might do to teach them to play a shot down the ground, as an example, is we might put the ball on a tee and get them to hit it off and try and hit between some cones, and you're trying to build that understanding of the shape of the shot. I guess what the end goal of making stuff more representative is ultimately you want that player to be able to, with a high level of challenge, to be able to play that same shot against bowlers. So it's almost being skillful as a coach to go, right, what are the steps in between that I can put in place to help the player on that journey? And I guess rather than something we've done a lot of, Griff, is rather than simplifying it too much straight away, giving players a bit of credit and going, right, how can they explore doing that quicker? So it might be setting up a practice within a net where your end goal is, right, I want my batters to be really competent at hitting the ball straight down the ground. So, right, what do I need to do for bowlers? How are they going to get a lot out of this session? Well, they need to bring the stumps into play to help the batter do what they need to do. And then likewise, I want to give that batter some context of where are they looking to hit the ball and why that might apply to a game scenario. So giving them the understanding of where mid-on, off and mid-on would be. And as a result, hopefully giving them some context through a visual of where they're looking to hit the ball. And that would be a really simple kind of method. But hopefully what you can start to see already then is it's gone from being a net where bowlers can bowl anywhere, batters are potentially just trying to compete and hit a ball, to having some real purpose that provides a development tool for bowlers who are looking to bring the stumps into play, which is an important thing in cricket because it keeps all dismissals in the game. And likewise for your batters, you're encouraging them to build their fundamentals, but ultimately make them transfer into a game as much as you can, or a representative practice as much as you can.
So I guess if we're looking at club coaches, you might get some indoor nets over the winter, some indoor training. Potentially the majority of stuff is going to be done over the summer, and it might be a 12-week period where you've got those players for an hour and a half, an evening once a week. How can you start implementing that within those sessions, and what might that look like across the course of a summer?
Do you want me to go with that, Drake?
Yeah, you can go again.
So I guess, we'll probably come on to this a little bit more with the coach decision-making stuff a little bit later on. But ultimately, yeah, like timeframes are really important, aren't they? So for me, I think you can look at it in terms of short-term timeframes and long-term timeframes. So from a short-term perspective, what does that look like within that session in terms of how long have I got with that individual? How am I getting the most bang for my buck, I guess, in that session? How am I providing the most opportunity? But also, what are my intentions within this session with the group, with the player that I'm working with, if it's a one-to-one? So there are a lot of things, I guess, that go into that. And then I guess from a long-term perspective, we're incredibly fortunate in our roles that we potentially could be working with. If someone comes into the pathway at 10 years old, they might be involved for, another 8 or 9 years within that pathway environment. So our long-term timeframes are we're probably quite fortunate with that we get a lot of time with people. But yeah, I guess there's a lot of things that would dictate what that might look like in terms of maximizing the use at that time. It would be dependent on what that time frame looks like for each individual. And then just making sure we're being quite deliberate with the planning of those sessions to make sure we're trying to create the opportunity to get the most out of whatever we're looking to do, really. Drake, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I just think, again, to kind of bring it to life, I'm trying to put my club coaching hat on from when I would have delivered stuff. So I would have been very guilty of, I would have had another job. I would have turned up to a coaching session at Minehead, and I probably would have either defaulted to whatever was easiest for me, which is running nets, or if the group were a lot younger, I would have played some form of game that I could just roll out and actually not thinking about the purpose of it for the player. I would have done that. And that's why I think things like this are important, because hopefully there's someone who's in that position like I was, that's just encouraged to think a bit differently. But if I kind of had that time again and I was thinking about it in a different way, what I'd look to do is go, right, how long have I got? Like Griff says, what's my intention of those 12 weeks? So ultimately, we're going to be playing lots of competitive matches alongside it. I know for these players to enjoy the competitive matches as much as possible, I want them to be able to deliver more balls that hit the top of the stumps, because I know that's most challenging for a batter to play. I want my batters to have more awareness of how to hit the balls into gaps and begin to understand, potentially if they're younger, 11, 12, begin to understand actually, right, how I play off the front and back foot, or how I identify balls to play off the front and back foot. And then what I'd be looking to do, and I don't think this is a very long task if it's done in one go, is then to work backwards from that and go, right, what are some sessions I can design that allow that to happen within a net-based context? Because what nets are brilliant for is opportunity. People get lots of time on task. They get lots of opportunities to bowl. If structured right, they get loads of opportunities to hit balls. But it might be, again, Griff, I'm going to steal a simple one that you've used across some of our assessments and bits like that, which I think has brought some stuff to life. But just something as simple as, right, I'm going to blue tape the top of the stump. So I'm going to blue tape the top 6 inches, and I'm going to encourage the bowlers to hit that. I'm going to build their understanding of why it's so important to hit that blue tape, because the batter's aim is going to be, if they think the ball is beneath that blue tape, they're going to look to play on the front foot. If the ball is above that blue tape, they're going to look to play off the back foot, which we know in cricket is generally how most players play. That's how most players identify length. And as a result, what the bowlers will begin to see, actually, particularly if you attach a point-based scoring system to it, they'll see that they'll create loads of indecision when they bowl balls at the blue tape. It might not happen very often, but they'll start to see that they create indecision. And already then you've started to build the understanding of bowlers of, right, that's why I bowl at the top of off stump. That's how I bowl at the top of off stump. And that would be a really simple example. And that may then build into, in week 3, actually, I'm going to encourage my batters to understand how they can get a ball both sides of the wicket. So the bowlers might be looking to do that same thing, but they might have some red cones on the leg side and some blue cones on the offside. And you might just encourage them to, for the next 3 balls, I want to see you score through the red zone. Next 3 balls, I want to see you score through the blue zone. And again, you're starting to build that context for players of, if they see space, how do I get the ball into that space? And Griff's point is a very good one at the start. I think what you'll see is you'll still see the importance of fundamentals, because ultimately people who don't move well, identify length well, create a good back path through the ball, they'll really struggle to do that. And then it will prompt a conversation about those things. But the players who have begun to do that well, what you'll start to learn about them is their ability to be skillful on top of the fundamentals. And then obviously over time, those targets or the context that you're giving them can narrow down or can change, and you'll start to see something that looks far more representative of a game-based practice. And that's just one thing of a million things. We're all creative people. Naturally, we do it in different ways, but we can all sit down or think, or sit in a coffee shop or on the drive home and think of a million ideas about how to do things differently. But I think giving yourself an opportunity to think, right, what is my end goal? What is my intention? How am I looking to develop players' understanding of the why, or even the what I'm trying to do? I think committing some time to that will lead to some really brilliant practices that transfer better into game. And if, like Chappie said, we're incredibly lucky that some of the players we're working with are of a really high quality, but even the academy players, even from my experience, professional players, they can still build a lot of those skills to build their understanding of the why, and that will really support their development.
Can I just jump in there, Chappie, just quickly? Because one thing that we've definitely seen, or I've personally seen it over the last couple of years, is just as they've started to develop that understanding of the why, the level of engagement in a couple of things, but actually the level of engagement in the what and the how. So the other sessions that we do alongside that might be actually around more technical fundamentals, whether that's a bowling or a batting session, the engagement is actually far better in those sessions because now they understand why that stuff's important. So actually, if I think of that from a batting perspective, it might be someone might have previously been doing sessions on transfer and weight into the ball on the front foot, but didn't actually understand the amount of control that might give them to be able to hit the ball where they want to hit it when they do that well. So actually, now they've got an understanding of where they're looking to score runs. They work harder in that practice and actually see a lot more value in it. Equally, from a bowling perspective, you could take any bowling fundamental there. For me, I'm massive on alignment, but actually, people who are poorly aligned, one example would be that they fall away a lot and can only swing the ball back. Well, actually, if they can see value in how they can look to get someone out if they can swing the ball away, it might be that actually they see a lot more value and engage well with the fundamental sessions around alignment as well. So that would be one thing. And I guess the other thing I was going to say as well is just around one thing that's really impressed me or surprised me, I guess, in sessions that we've delivered would be the level of execution as well. Like I've been, like Drake's is spot on. We're very fortunate with the level of players that we get to work with. But actually, they've kind of blown me away sometimes in terms of how well they've executed skills when they've understood why they need to do it well and how important executing the skill well is. So yeah, that would be a couple of things for me that's been really, really interesting to see just around the level of their execution and engagement going up once they start to get that more tactical awareness and understanding, really.
I think there's loads of really good points that both of you guys have made there from what you just said there, Griff, about understanding the why. So actually, you know, it used to be back in the day that you play cricket on a Saturday against a kid that's in a county age group setup, and they'd have spent so much time on the bowling machine hitting half volleys straight to mid-off that they'd come out and they'd nail 4 or 5 beautiful straight drives straight to mid-off, score no runs from it, but they didn't have any understanding of actually that's not effective. How do I actually score runs with this shot? So actually for them, so that go from, well, you can do it, you know how to do it. This is now why you need to look at scoring runs and how you're going to do that and the reasons behind it, then brings that to life for them. So I think understanding that why and with anything they do is really important, and certainly more so for girls. So as a general rule, boys are pretty simple. We don't need a lot. Someone will tell us to do something, we won't worry about asking, we'll just get on and do it. Whereas actually girls think a little bit deeper and actually want to know why they're doing something, what the purpose of it is. So actually being able to explain, this is the activity we're doing, this is what we're going to practice, and this is why, this is what it's going to help you with. Actually, that's really important for their development as well. So they see the purpose of doing it. And that ties in, Drakes, to what you said right at the start of what you were, when you were talking a second ago, is the purpose to the session, and making sure that there's an outcome for those players within it. And you know, you guys have the luxury of being full-time employees, that you have that bit of extra time to spend planning sessions, for planning winter training, for planning a block of delivery, for working more one-to-one with certain players and spending more time with them. Actually, guys out in clubland, they might have that 20-minute drive to the club. They might have 10 minutes over lunchtime on a Friday evening for junior practice. But actually, it only takes a few minutes to think about, right, what might have happened in that game on the weekend or earlier in the week, what's going to help these players move forward next. So I know that I can turn up to the session and go, right, this is a purpose, this is a reason of what we're going to do today, and then come up with an activity around that. So that purpose of what they're practicing is really important.
Yeah, I think on that, Chappie, as well, and again, we spoke about it earlier, but I think the reason for having that bit of information and that clarity yourself as a coach on why that's so important is it then shapes everything you do. So it shapes the reason why you're delivering the session. It means you can stay on task with your feedback that you deliver to players. And then when you come to set up that session and review that session at the end, you can relate it back to that topic. And I think, again, sometimes as coaches, and I speak very, very much from experience here, we can be really guilty of trying to tell players everything we know or trying to solve every problem that we see, like, immediately. Now, if you've got that clarity on, right, what is the purpose of today? How am I trying to help this player? Then you can make sure that you're always coming back to that point, and it will go in different directions sometimes, but you're giving that player that clarity so that they can get back in the car and chat to mum and dad and say, oh, this is what we did today. This is why it's going to help me. And likewise, they're more likely to, when they next play a game or next have a practice, be able to delve back to that bit of information. And yeah, you're absolutely right, Chappie. Like we are very, very lucky, but even still, there'll be times where Griffiths had lot on through the day and he's driving across to Millfield to deliver a session, and he'll make sure that he realigns himself and gets that clarity on what the purpose of today is. And I think that's so important. You're right.
And I think to kind of finish this little part around the why and developing that, when we're looking at kind of fixtures, so you mentioned earlier about how you've been able to be out in the middle with players and training games and kind of stop games and go through certain aspects of it. Don't have quite the same opportunity to do that within kind of club 20 games of an evening, that kind of stuff. But what opportunities are there within those games actually to use them as learning experiences for those players? What can coaches do within those games in a fairly light touch way, but can actually, again, aid that development and that understanding?
Yeah, Griff, I'll just start off because I've just seen in the chat box, Rob Reed, hello Rob, has asked a question as well, which I think, again, this is probably a good time to link it in. So Rob's asked, is there any value in including the player or players in deciding on the intention of the session? Now, for me, absolutely, that would be my kind of number one priority. Obviously, it's then considering where the player is at in terms of where are they at with their knowledge to understand actually the journey that they need to go on. That's really important. But I think if the players have a good sound understanding of themselves, how stuff's feeling, how games went, they're able to feed back really well. I think that's so important. And that's why the setting up and the debriefing of everything you do, even if it's a couple of minutes or longer, if it's really worthwhile doing, I think is important, because you as a coach might get some brilliant feedback from players on, look, coach, we really struggled today with the opening bowler. Like he was swinging it around, and when we've practiced, none of our bowlers swing it. And then actually it's the skill of a coach of, right, how can I implement that within the next session? We might have to do something totally different. I might have to tape up some tennis balls or Incredibles and make sure that the players have a knowledge of how they can play a swinging ball. But without that ability to set up the session and then review it, you might never get that information from players and might just be frustrated that they keep getting out to the opening bowlers. So yeah, hopefully, Rob, that helps answer it. But yeah, absolutely, that would always be my number one direction of sourcing the shaping of where a player's development is going. Obviously, alongside my own, I've got a framework of what that journey would look like, but the player being able to buy into that and to lead on that would always be my priority.
I think just on that, from my perspective, like Drake's alluded to it there, but for me, there's a lot of evidence for it being beneficial to provide people with autonomy, players. But ultimately, if their understanding of the game is really poor and really low, they need a lot of support with that side of things first before you can give them that level of autonomy. So actually, you can be smart with what that autonomy might look like. You might give them a choice between two options that are going to be really good and beneficial options for them. And then depending on the level of cricket you're working with. So if I relate that to our environment, it might be that in the academy, someone might have a really good understanding of what they need to develop. So actually I could touch base with them the day before and ask them what they want to work on in the next session. Whereas actually, if I'm doing a session with someone who's new to the pathway and is 11 years old, that'll probably look quite different. So it's absolutely spot on. You know, giving them that ability to be involved in that process is really important. But yeah, you wouldn't want to give them full control of that if they're someone who probably doesn't understand the game and what they need to do better, really. So it's getting that balance right. But just on the briefing and debriefing section, so like one piece of really strong advice I was given a few years ago was you can't debrief something if you haven't briefed it. And I know Drake's spoke there about the importance of setting the session up well beforehand. I think it was so powerful for me because I could relate to how I coached before I received that advice. And ultimately I'd set a lot of challenges up within the session in different practices. And then you would debrief each of them with players. And you would kind of realize then that the player may not have had the level of clarity or understanding beforehand of what they were doing and why. It was kind of just a debrief afterwards, rather than actually, like you say, having that conversation to set that challenge up before then being able to reflect on how it went. So yeah, I think that's quite a strong bit of advice that I was given a few years ago. But yeah.
No, I think that's brilliant, and we talk about it a lot on our coach education courses around actually, if you set your session up, if you nail your intro to the session to discuss what you're going to be practicing and why you're going to be practicing it, actually the rest of your session can just flow from that, because you're able to observe what the purpose is, why you're doing it. You're able to feed back to players on that. You're able to question them around it. And then at the end, you're able to tie it all together. So having those, setting something up makes it really clear for the players that then everything flows throughout. And I think you mentioned, Griff, about that players' understanding of the game is going to be key to being able to move forward with it. And within those fixtures that you play in junior club cricket, actually just taking an opportunity at the end of a game to have a 5-minute debrief on that. And it might have been actually that you asked them to think about something specific in the game. It might just have been a couple of things you saw in the game just to discuss as a group. And it might be picking out some brilliant bits that you've seen your team do, whether it was some smart decision making, whether it was a good piece of cricket, whatever it might have been. It might have been something that the opposition did, actually highlighting that so that they kind of take that away with them, so that next time if that situation arises or something happens, they can kind of have a bank to go back to think about from it. So it's, I guess, everything we do, particularly with the why and a lot around tactical awareness, is giving them as many opportunities and putting them in as many different situations as you can, so that when they find themselves in that situation, they're not looking across at the sideline to mum or dad or coach to find the answers to it. Actually, they've already been in it before through practice or in a game, or they've been in something similar and they've got the tools to work their way out of it. So giving them the opportunity to practice within those sessions or within games as well can have a huge impact.
Can I just pick up on one thing that you kind of alluded to, and it is vaguely linked to what you were saying, but so one thing, so you talk about like what those games could look like and what that could look like on a match day, just kind of to, I guess, wrap up the developing the why and understanding the tactical side of things from a match play perspective. One thing that we've done a lot over the last couple of summers, and I've been quite surprised by other counties have been really receptive to it as well, is we've kind of enforced it at times with younger age groups, the amount of fielders they have to have outside the ring. So obviously we would understand if it was a 50 over game as an example, or even if it's a T20, rather than it being a case of, right, in the middle overs of a 50 over game, you can have 4 out. We've actually made our players have 4 out on the boundary. And then actually they've started to set fields that look a lot more like what they would, or what the game would look like at the top end. But the benefit of that is that it creates loads of gaps in space for then batters to be able to look to identify those gaps in space and score runs. So all of a sudden the game starts to look more like a high-end game of cricket, just because at the age of 13, if we go down the route of just letting them have your stereotypical sort of ring filled with everyone really close to the batter, it becomes really hard for batters to score any runs and hit through or over that ring. So that's kind of just came to me then around when you spoke about what those matches would look like. But that's been something that's been good. Our way around that would be we would touch base with the opposition beforehand to just check that they're obviously happy with that. On the whole, they have been. So it's been really cool. And obviously the only time we would adapt that would be if it was for the betterment of the game. That obviously if a team needs to go at 4 and over for the last 10 overs and they've got 5 men out, it's probably not going to be brilliant for everyone. So, you know, that'd be one idea there that's been useful that potentially may or may not be relevant, I guess, within a club environment as well, in terms of agreeing that beforehand and looking to do that would certainly be beneficial, I'd say.
No, and I think there's a responsibility on us as coaches actually to why do we play junior games, you know, whether it's under 11, under 15. I don't imagine many people on this room have a trophy on the mantelpiece from being under 10 East Somerset Youth League champion or anything like that, but I bet they've got loads of memories of some brilliant times they had playing that and some brilliant games they had. So actually it's really hard, and I know that I'm saying this knowing full well that it's pretty hard to implement, but actually, why are we playing games? Are we playing games to develop young players, or are we playing games to win games of cricket? And there's a balance between the two. But actually, is there any purpose in a team turning up with a really strong side, knowing full well they're going to give the other side a pretty good hiding? Actually, there's an opportunity for coaches to talk to each other and find a way of manipulating that game to make it a closer game, so it's better for everyone. And my under 10s pairs team that I manage at my local club, we will have conversations with the other manager before we play the game, just to match players up, so we're not putting our most experienced players against their least experienced and vice versa, just so that they're all going to get something out of it. So it can be in the simplest form of that, and can go as far as you want, and kind of that's down on coaches to try and make that and help those players develop in that essence, as opposed to you kind of see games of 200 plays 30 and you kind of think who's achieved what out of that. Now it might end up being 120 plays 80, but actually probably some people have had a lot more impact on that game and it's had a bit more of an influence on them. I'm conscious of time, when we spent a lot of time on the why, which I think is probably, you guys mentioned as well, the area that can have the biggest impact on players is their understanding of what they're doing and why they're doing it. Just kind of touch a little bit more on practice design for me and what that might look like.
Do you want me to take that, Drake? So
Yeah, you start off again.
Yeah, so I guess for me, just understanding, again, all of these areas kind of link together really well, really, in terms of when we talk about coach decision making, which we haven't really come on to yet, but we kind of have discussed it already a few times. Like, first and foremost, I guess we need to understand what our intentions are, and there's a lot of good stuff out there at the moment. I'm guessing a few people on this call would have probably engaged with some of the sort of constraints-led approach stuff that's sort of going around at the moment. There's quite a lot of that going around in the last few years. And sort of how we're looking to design our environments based on what our intentions are, really. And I think it is a really important one, that for me. And like, it was actually a bit of an accident, but I guess the games that I just spoke about there, like that would be an example of a really representative environment. So a practice environment that effectively looks just like the game, which is the game itself. The constraint that we've added there is there has to be 4 players outside of the ring. So we've created a rule that basically creates opportunities for players to develop their game because we've created more gaps in space. So look, the stuff for me with practice design, I guess the best way of considering it, and this certainly isn't my method, it's stuff that I've engaged with, but in terms of the practice representativeness, like I just said there, highly representative practices would be it looking exactly like the game itself. And like we've spoke about at the beginning of the call, we were really fortunate as a result of COVID, we ended up being able to be on field with players a lot more and be able to set up practices in a game situation that were highly representative. And I guess the evidence there would suggest that the more representative the environment is, the more likely that practice or that skill is to transfer into that game-like environment. So there's a lot of reasons and positive reasons for doing it. But that isn't to say that there's no value in the low representative stuff. And that would be, like you spoke about earlier, the lowest one might be hitting a cricket ball off a tee, practicing your front foot drive, or it might be facing a bowling machine and grooving one kind of shot, and really sort of trying to get a good awareness of that feeling of that shot. So there's certainly, I guess, a value in both. But for me, yeah, that would be the best way of framing it, is how representative is the practice that we're creating of the game situation. And then are we comfortable with that? You know, what's our intention? What are we trying to achieve? And then, are we comfortable with the practice we're setting up, working towards that? And obviously there's a lot of things that dictates our ability there, what facilities we've got, what timeframes we've got, how many players we've got in those sessions would all have a massive impact in what those practices look like. But there would be sort of the things I'll be considering there. Drake, is there anything you wanted to follow up on that?
Yeah, I'm going, what does that look like at a club cricket level? And obviously the challenges that I think probably differ. Again, we're very lucky that all our players within a session, they're going to have a certain level of competence that allow them to almost any practice that we would come up with on a group level, people will be able to do. So we're very lucky from a practice design. point of view in that aspect. But I still think, again, you can be clever in terms of, right, if I know I've got a sliding scale of abilities at my session, it might be that you've got two really strong batters. And as a result, when they're practicing in the nets, and I'll go back to that blue tape on top of the stumps, you might, within that bit, the bowler's aim might be to hit the blue tape on top of the stumps, because you know the batters are able to challenge themselves and move forward and get away from the ball. Whereas it might be that, and again, this is the skillfulness of the coach to set up the challenge, actually, less competent batters where you know that they're really going to struggle to move onto the back foot and to be able to cope with the demands of that challenge. It might be that actually the bowler's aim shifts within that. So actually, right, bowlers, now you're looking to hit only the yellow part of the stumps. So you know that those bowlers' intentions are going to be, I'm looking to bowl full here. And they'll obviously still bowl short, but you're less likely to provide a high level of challenge to that player. It might be a little bit simpler for the batter. And I think ultimately the simplest thing to do is, are we spending enough time thinking about the session, thinking about what we're trying to get out of it, selling the why, as Griff says, and then thinking about how you can just turn the level of challenge up or down dependent on the individual within that session. And again, we're all creative enough, if we allow ourselves to be, to think of what those different options may be. So that would be my big thing, almost having a pre-planned dial that you can turn up or down to make that challenge less or more for players dependent on ability.
I think that's a really nice example as well of, actually, you don't have to make it really obvious that you're making it much easier for the batters. You're just slightly tweaking the challenge for the bowler, so it's still relevant to them. It's still challenging them. But actually, the outcome of that is it's hopefully making it slightly easier for the batters to give them a little bit more of an opportunity to be successful in the task as well. So a real minor tweak, but actually has a big impact on either, because it's still challenging both. So yeah, lots of really nice things around that as well, and actually just that creativity and that thinking and that ability just to spend a little bit of time planning so that you can really nail down what you're trying to achieve out of that session, and enable, whether it's 10 players that have turned up to your session that night or 15 players, to hopefully enable all of them to have a challenge that's relevant to them within the actual activity itself. Brilliant, thank you, gents. One more before we head into some questions. So if you have got some questions, feel free to start adding them into the chat. As a coach, thinking around, obviously, developing that why, thinking about the design of our practice, what other decisions are going to be key for coaches within that context? I'll go to you first, Drakes, and then let Griff follow up.
Repeat the question again, Chappie?
Oh, you're asking a lot now. So within, when you're thinking about developing the why as a coach, you're looking at the kind of practice you're going to design, that kind of stuff, what other decisions as a coach do we need to think about within that context as well? What else might there be?
I think that
you think about it.
Yeah, you can go.
So look, I guess for me, the important stuff going into sessions would be, again, a really useful framework I find would be who, what, how framework. So going into those sessions, I'd be thinking about, when planning, who am I working with, what am I working on, and how am I going to go about doing it? And this certainly isn't my framework. There's some good content out there around that stuff. If you search that model, who, what, how model, you'll find some stuff online from a coaching perspective. But it's really simple, and I think it covers a lot of good basis in terms of understanding the individuals that we're working with. What do they need as individuals? What level are they at? What are we working on? So is it a technical session? Is it a tactical session? And then how are we going to go about doing that? Which obviously comes back to some of the stuff we've already discussed about how we're shaping our practices, what approach we might take as coaches. Are we looking to question a lot? Is there a bit more instruction in that session based on the fact that we might not have long with that player? So understanding how we can sort of adapt our approach based on the requirements of the individual. But I think, I love a framework, but for me, that's quite a good one in terms of how it can support the decisions that we make when we're planning. And I think it also gives us something to reflect against after the session as well, in terms of, well, how did that go? Would I need to adapt anything if I was to run that session again? And reflecting well on that stuff as well. So the other areas we've kind of already discussed, but it's obvious, but understanding your session intention is absolutely huge. And then understanding the timeframes that you're working towards and how long you've got with that player on that day, but also how long do you have access to that player for throughout a longer period of time as well. But there'd be my main thoughts on how we'd look to sort of make those decisions, I guess.
Yeah, Chappie, I'm going to stay quite simple in the summary, because I think it is the most impactful thing, and I love that who, what, how model. Ultimately, as a coach, if you're spending that time actually setting up that session and understanding what you're trying to get out of the block and trying to get out of the session itself, I think what that then allows you to build is such a vast amount of framework that you can work off. And I think as coaches, unless we're highly skillful and have loads of experience, I think it's really hard to just do it like off the cuff when stuff crops up. You've got to have something that you're working against from a framework point of view. So what Griff's talking about there in terms of having that clarity, you can then start to understand, right, these are some of the things that I might expect to come up in the session. I might expect to have some conversations with batters about what cues are they looking for from the bowlers when the ball might miss the tape short or full. I might have to chat with those batters who I've had to adapt the session for about examples of other people who have struggled with facing short pitch bowling and how that might develop over time, and almost speaking through your mini framework for them of what that might look like over the next few weeks. So I think in terms of consideration, there's a million things that you could consider, but if you've got that clarity on the aim of the session and the aim for the participant, whether it be them led or you led, I think what that then allows you to do in advance and during the session is take that where you want it to, as opposed to if you don't have that, I think it's really hard to do anything purposeful unless, like I said, you've got an immense skill base or an immense experience of delivering coaching sessions where you can just dive into stuff. But I think you have to coach for a very, very, very long time to be able to do that. I don't think there are any expert coaches that exist in the world, and I'm certainly not claiming to be one by any stretch.
Brilliant. Thank you, gents. We'll get one more answer from you right at the very end around the one piece of advice you'd give coaches, but we've got some other questions coming in before we get to that one. So first one from David Turner. Any top tips for coaching under 15 girls teams?
I'll start off on this one, Griff. So, David, I think firstly, the really exciting thing with girls cricket, women's cricket at the moment is the exposure for women and girls cricket means that actually the players are seeing more of the game happen in front of their eyes that's representative to them. So they're seeing Sophie Luff play for Western Storm or Welsh Fire. They're seeing England on telly in World Cups. And as a result, if we can provide ways of giving them access to that information, because they won't all have it, whether that be sending out YouTube videos of highlights and bits like that, I think we've got a really exciting opportunity where understanding of what good looks like can grow really quickly. I think one of my, again, COVID experiences, I worked with the girls' side of the pathway more in that period than I had before. And actually, whereas with the boys, sometimes I can use really like top class examples of people who do stuff well, and they'll be able to have that clarity on what it looks like. I don't think that necessarily always exists within the girls' game yet, because ultimately it hasn't been able to be seen. So a couple of tips I would have, whether they're top tips, I'm not sure, is can you build that context for players? Can you share with them, help grow their love of the game, help them see role models that they might begin to pick up little coaching cues from or little technical cues from and start to adopt. Like we've got a million lads in the pathway who went through a period of trying to be Steve Smith or who left the ball like Marnus Labuschagne after all those videos went out. How can we start to do that for the girls as well? How can we, again, because there hasn't been much of it that's happened, how can we provide loads of opportunity for them to bowl balls, hit balls, with some direction on what we're looking for them to do, but not trying to make it too simple or constrain them too much in terms of exploring the how they go about doing it. And then dependent on the level of the player. So one thing I was really interested in the other day is we had an EPP player, a girl come in, and she was doing a batting session, and she was fortunate enough to face one of the Western Storm Academy girls the other day. And she's a really good batter. So I watch her face throws, I watch her face our Merlin spin bowling machine, and she looks really skillful. Now, she faced the bowler, and the session had been set up to provide as much context as could possibly be given, because she's got a festival tournament coming up. And one thing that was really interesting for me is at the end of that session, she specifically pointed out how the field was helpful for her, because it allowed her to have a framework of how she should bat in that situation. And for a lot of people, like it would be such a simple thing for someone to say that you'd almost be like, oh, you're just saying that because there is a field out. But again, I don't think we can underestimate the lack of exposure that some of these girls have had to stuff that we take for granted in cricket. I think even from a club point of view, from a county point of view, the level of provision we're offering girls, it needs to grow, it needs to get better, it is getting better. So, David, those would be my top things. How can you create more context, create more best examples for the players? How can you give them more opportunity? And then I guess the whole point of this call, how can you build the why for them more? Because I think that's where we'll see girls flourish, if they have the tactical understanding, because they will engage with it and they will be able to implement it far better and far quicker, is my belief.
Brilliant. Thank you, Drakes. Next question from Jason. How much do you use the play cricket wagon wheels, etc., to coach during or after a game and share with players to show, for example, where they are playing shots bowling? So how much would you use the wagon wheels as a coaching tool ultimately?
Yeah, we definitely do. I think we sort of do one of two things on match days. I guess we're quite fortunate in the sense that we've got an analyst who occasionally can code different age group fixtures, but we will either be scoring it from our phone or iPad ourselves as coaches, and definitely looking to input as much of that evidence in data as we can. Or there'll be someone there to use exactly the same software, but use the footage to link up with it. So it is really important. And if I think about what that might have looked like and examples of that, so I guess linking back earlier to Rob's question and the level of sort of player engagement in the autonomy side of things that we spoke about earlier, one thing we've done in the last couple of seasons, since having the footage and the evidence to be able to support stuff, is at younger age groups. I spoke earlier about kind of providing more autonomy to players as they get older and their understanding develops. To try and develop that understanding of different roles, we've kind of prescribed roles to players at times at the younger age groups. So it might be an under 13 player whose job is to bowl a spell with the new ball in the power play, and they're looking to challenge the top third of the stumps and swing the ball in either direction. And that's their role. But then actually having that information available has been really, really useful to be able to reflect back after the game with them and see how well they executed their plans there. Equally, from a batting perspective, there might have been someone who's batting at the start of the innings who their approach might have been looking to play strong shots through or over the top of the ring in the first power play. And actually, you've got the ability to reflect on where they look to score the runs as well. So it's definitely something we do. It's something we're always keen to keep growing that as well. But yeah, it's really useful. I think anything that's kind of evidence-based and can be used to reflect on players and enhance their learning is obviously going to be really useful. So definitely something we do, but I think it's really useful for sure.
Brilliant. Thank you, Griff. Final question from the floor at the moment. What age would you introduce mental skills into sessions?
I'm not sure I would put an age limit on it in terms of when it starts happening. I think potentially, and more importantly, it depends what the conversations you're having are. So I think as coaches, we're extremely lucky in that the relationships and the rapport we'll have with players and the opportunities we get to interact with players, I think we can have a huge effect on the mental side of the game. Now, what that definitely doesn't mean is that with an under 13 county age group player, I'm going to start sitting down with them and almost acting as a psychologist. But what I can do is I can begin to talk about what their approach might be in between balls, or I might try and help them understand the process of like reflecting on their performance and why it might be important to remove emotion from reflecting. So I don't necessarily think it begins at an age group or evolves more at an age group. It is very much actually what does the player require from you, and do you feel it's appropriate for them to be having that conversation? But I don't think those conversations need to be overly kind of formal and let's get everyone in and talk about resilience, or let's get everyone in and talk about grit. It's very much relating it into the cricket, because again, that will help to build the understanding of the why it's important, rather than learning about something that you then can't attach to what you're doing, or doesn't relate to someone's bowling short of me. Am I being resilient here? Actually, it's a conversation to almost have on the job. And I think, again, the skill of a coach to choose the right time to do that.
Can I just jump in on that as well, Chappie, quickly?
Go for it.
So, I think for me, I think you can be smart going back to the practice design stuff on how you design that stuff into your session without having to be really explicit with having those conversations. And examples of that might be actually, or you could allude to it, and I think there'll be a lot of reasons for doing that as well. But it might be that you're setting up quite a challenging practice that you speak to players about. Actually, you might just drop the word resilience into conversation. Actually, if you can get through this practice, you're going to show a lot of resilience. As an example, there might be stuff around, practices where there's a lot of value in being really committed to that. There'll be a lot of other stuff, I guess, that'd be useful, and you can design in without having to sort of have a session around, setting up conversations to have with players around mental skills. I think you can be a lot more sort of smarter, I guess, in terms of how we plan that into sessions and practices. And I think one phrase that's useful there, I guess, would be, and a lot of you have probably heard it already, but like comfort the uncomfortable and make the comfortable more uncomfortable, I guess, in terms of how you're looking to stretch players. If people are already really stretched, actually, how can we support them more? And actually, if they're finding something really easy, how can we make it more challenging for them? And I think that comes from a skill perspective, and also a psychological perspective as well would be something to consider. But anything really that develops their awareness of when certain psychological skills might be of benefit for them, and creating practices in order for them to develop that is going to be useful, all underpinned by the fact that, again, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that players are going to still be cognitively developing psychologically until their early to mid-20s as well. So don't expect a 12-year-old to be the most resilient cricketer and make the best decisions in the world, because a lot of people that we see in the pro staff still can't do that.
No, brilliant. Thank you. And I think that's what you said there about making the comfortable uncomfortable and that kind of stuff ties in quite nicely for those that were on the webinar with Andy Hurry a month or so ago, around actually, if you can create an environment for your players where actually it's okay to fail, it's okay to find things challenging, and for that to be the driver behind, actually, if something's really easy, we're not learning, we're not getting any better, but they want to turn up, they want to be challenged, they want to have that mixture of failure and success. And if you can create that environment, then actually that's going to help develop those players as well. Gents, I'm conscious of the time, so we'll go to our last question. 30 seconds each. Griff, you're on my screen, so we'll come for you first. What's the biggest piece of advice you would give to coaches to help support their players? That's 5 seconds gone.
Yeah, I guess be deliberate. We've spoke about it a lot tonight in terms of understanding your intentions. It's really easy to sort of coast through sessions. Certainly my reflection on that, and everyone's got really positive intentions in terms of their reasons for being involved, absolutely. But if you can take a couple of minutes to, like we say, to plan your sessions, to be really deliberate on that, and then a couple of minutes on the car journey home to reflect on how that went, I think that's going to be really good for your development as a coach, but also the development of your players as well. So I guess that sort of intentionality around your delivery and how you reflect would be my one thing, really.
Good, thank you, Griff. That was a big 20 seconds. About the look on Drake's face, he's either got cramp or you stolen his answer. Drake's.
Yeah, he was definitely in stoppage time when he nicked my one as well, but mine would be that reflection element. So actually, as coaches, I think that is your best way that you can help the players, is by giving yourself time and opportunity to grow, which I appreciate is hard, but we would do it on the way home in the car, whether it be having a chat with another coach or just spending time to think and review, actually, how did that go? How did I come across to the players? What would I change? If you can show growth yourself, ultimately that's going to be for the betterment of the players going forward. So that would be mine, but thanks for stealing it, Griff.
Pleasure.
Brilliant. Gents, thank you very much. Thank you for everyone coming on the call this evening. I hope you found it useful and lots of stuff to take away. What we will do as well is Drake's and Griff will kind of summarize some of the key things from tonight, which I'll send out to you guys along with the recording. So you've got some stuff to take away with there. But thank you very much for being on the call. Griff and Drake's.
Chappie, could I just ask a question? So, and this is, feel free to use the chat box, or feel free to grab my email from Scott and send me an email about what your thoughts would be to this. So something we're looking to do for next winter. So we're looking to supply players with more information about, right, some of the things you might hear us talk about. Here's how you can support your development away from our environment. So we would talk a lot about alignment to players. So here's some ways in which you could develop your alignment at home or at school, just trying to make sure that our county age group stretches as far as it can, or sorry, our time stretches as far as it can. I think there'll be a real crossover with some of the information that we can give that will be really relevant for club coaches or club practices. I'd be really interested to know from your point of view, is there anything that we as pathway coaches or we as a pathway could give you, albeit that it's got to be stuff that we're able to create? It can't be too blue sky thinking. Is there stuff that we could give to you in terms of our knowledge or our experience of delivering sessions that we might be able to record a 1-minute clip on that would help you then implement that within your environments? Because ultimately calls like this are brilliant, because we want to try and help the way we're delivering spread as far as we can across the county. But I'm wary that this is just a 45-minute phone call. We've got to try and help more than that. So if anyone has got any ideas or any thoughts on that, like, please get in touch, because we're really keen to do as much as we can of that towards the end of the summer to make it ready to go for next winter. So any ideas would be much appreciated.
Brilliant. Thank you, Drakes. Thank you, Griff. Thank you, Drakes. Thank you, gents. And thank you everyone on the call, and have a fantastic summer, and hopefully we'll see you out and about across the county as we go, or one across the southwest as well. But thank you very much all, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks very much. Cheers, guys.